This is Roger Bianchini in the Royal Examiner National Media Studio with Jeff Brown, Chairman of the Board of the EDA Warren County now, although it's technically the Front Royal Warren County Economic Development Authority still, right?
It still is and will be.
Right, because it's about almost half-century precedent, isn't it? If
Yep.
not more. But anyway, Jeff, welcome. It's been, I think, a little more than a month since we talked last.
It is.
And I know public interest is pretty high on what is or isn't happening in the aftermath of the EDA financial scandal that the current board inherited. So could we touch base a little bit on that as far as the civil litigation, which I think is a
Sure.
big one on people's mind because it's about recovery of assets.
Right.
And then there's a lot of conversation about how much you're spending versus how much you'll recover. But what is the situation there as far as the civil litigation, which I believe the defense list is up to 24 defendants now?
Yeah,
23 plus McDonald.
Yeah, it's right in that range.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I haven't counted recently.
And it seems that the Jennifer McDonald's bankruptcy filing complicated everything on that front. And then that resulted in this $9 million settlement agreement where she doesn't admit wrongdoing, but as I understand it, does admit that she owes the money.
Correct.
Can we talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So it's in bankruptcy. So admitting liability isn't the issue. It's really what they do with the assets. And an agreement was reached between EDA and Jennifer McDonald, Du Bois, and Move On 8, which are the two LLCs that she owns.
Real estate LLC.
Yeah, right. And it calls for an acknowledgement of owing $9 million. Now, this goes through a process, so it isn't just an agreement that the two sides agreed to. Since everything she had was in bankruptcy, it had to obviously first have the agreement. Then it had to be approved by has to be approved by the trustee, has to be approved by the bankruptcy court. Then it can be taken out of
so
bankruptcy.
The trustee and the judge both have to sign.
Both have to sign off on it. And then it would go to our circuit court, and we'd file it there. So it's a process to go through it. But if it goes through, it acknowledges that she owes EDA $9 million, and we can collect that. It's non-dischargeable in bankruptcy. She can't.
So that $9 million is exempt from the bankruptcy ruling.
It's exempt from that.
But as I understand it, anything you would recover on the bankruptcy side would go to apply to that $9 million.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and anything else that we got. So there are several properties that she owned that have been sold, and we don't have a ruling yet, but we expect to have one, and we expect to get a large percentage of those properties that have been sold.
Were those properties that the civil court judge early on, which was Clay Athey, didn't freeze? Because he froze some of the assets, I think the ones that were in her name loan, but then she had other properties with relatives, I think her husband and her mother, and they didn't freeze those. Were those the ones, do you know, that were sold?
I'm uncertain. I haven't connected those two, but there's the biggest property that was sold was in Rileyville, and then a couple of another smaller one. So then there's a property in Happy Creek that would come to EDA and be exempt from the bankruptcy proceedings in the process. So we're hopeful that this is a way that we can save the taxpayers money on attorney's fees. It's an acknowledgement of owing the EDA that sum of money, and that it's non-dischargeable. So it's a win-win, I think, all the way around.
And that's an important aspect of it. It will lessen the court time and the lawyer's argument time, because we have an agreement now. We have to figure out, once it's approved by everybody, it needs to be approved, how do we move forward to settle this?
Right.
And it's a lot less legal expenses.
Exactly. So it made a lot of sense to us to do that. It keeps her from having. She benefits from it in a way. Of course, she doesn't have to pay attorney's fees as well, and she can focus on what is presumably upcoming, which should be criminal charges. So, I think that it's a good thing that happened.
Now, before we segue into the criminal aspect of this case, as we were talking at the opening, we believe there's 24 civil defendants. What's the status with the other 23? I know they're all at different levels of involvement,
Right.
But it's looked at as sort of an overarching conspiracy that they may have known money was being funneled
Right.
their way. But
Yeah, so we continue to pursue all of them. A couple have been excused just for either lack of evidence or lack of assets. Our focus is on recovering assets for the people of Warren County and Front Royal, and that's where we're focusing our time and effort in doing it. So we're pursuing everyone that has been named as defendants, and they're in various stages of process. It's been slowed, obviously, by the pandemic. Civil cases were almost non-existent getting resolved in 2020,
Right.
and now there was a backlog before, now there's a huge backlog of civil cases, but we continue to pursue them. And just feel that that's an obligation that we should be doing.
with all the accountants and auditors that have been looking at the finances, and I know that's an important thing, the 2018 and 2019 audits are virtually on the edge of finally being finished.
Yes.
Hopefully we'll shed some light on money movement back towards the end of that whole episode. But do we have a ballpark at all now on asset recovery versus how much it's cost to get to that point?
Yeah, I'd rather wait just a little while. I think we're still a little bit behind, but you have to remember that, and this is a year ago that I last got a number. We have 1 million pages of documentation on this case that had to be compiled, reviewed by attorneys. We've had multiple filings in court. We've gone through the bankruptcy proceeding and everything dealing with the lawyer costs money.
Right.
So what we're now starting to see are
And hopefully on
assets
the back
coming in.
end it'll turn a little bit more in your favor when,
Yes.
when the assets start coming back.
Right.
Especially the 9 million.
Yeah. Well, if we get it all, sure.
Yeah, right. All right, then we did touch base. The criminal cases are not only out of Warren County prosecutors' hands, but they're also out of the state prosecutors' hands. Now it's been turned over to the federal government,
Right.
Western District of Virginia, I believe it's 10th. Any status reports on where that is? 'Cause that seems to be at a standstill.
Well, it seems that, but the Justice Department is notoriously closed-mouthed about pending criminal cases. So we really hear very little about it. But what little we hear, we have a lot of hope that they intend to pursue it. You have to understand, this was the largest embezzlement in the governmental history of Virginia. And you have to
And
pursue
probably
that.
the largest number of pages of evidence involved. I think that it even attracted the attention of the state Supreme Court early on.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even up to 1 million. It was like 800,000 pages.
A mere 800,000, right? So it's something that we continue. We would continue to cooperate fully with the federal authorities. And we look eagerly to getting some of these criminal prosecutions going. I just think justice delayed is an injustice. So we have to. We want to, as a community, we want to advocate for the Justice Department to stay on this and get to it.
And eventually we're going to get to economic development and out of litigation. But one more front I wanted to ask you about is that you continue to have the dueling civil litigations between the town of Front Royal and the EDA, which was started by the town. Any movement towards settlement there? I mean, that seems like a lot of waste of taxpayer money in two directions.
Right. Yeah. We're having some very productive talks, and when the business with the sludge controversy came up, those talks were halted. And it just strikes me that this is something that we should be able to resolve. And I want to encourage the town of Front Royal, the county, and EDA has always stood for, let's sit down and resolve these things. It's a real simple process. There were projects that were done. There were legitimate expenses, and what we did in the police station was to prove, here's the expenses that we had. And we went through them. The town had their finance department review them. They said they were correct. We agreed on a number. They went out and got a loan and paid for the principal amount. Now, in that case, the interest is at issue. I would say the same thing would apply there and for other projects that.
And I guess it's not your fault that maybe today or more recently the interest rates have been better than they were when the loan originally went out.
Yeah, you can't suddenly.
And you have adjusted down over the last few years, right?
Yes.
The bank on your end has lowered the rate.
Lowered the rates on it. So our goal is to again show here's the proof on our side. Here's the proof of the interest rate. Here's the proof of other projects that the town owes money on. We should be able to reach agreement on most of those things. And if they've got proof going the other way, then it's the time to show it. And then if, we ought to be able to resolve
Because otherwise you're continuing to waste both of your all's time and effort and money.
and time, both are important, but it takes a lot of time to handle these things. I'd much rather be doing a lot more economic development. But we may get to a point where there's something that there isn't enough evidence on one side or the other, and then you could sit down and negotiate a deal on it. But in the meantime, why not continue a process where we're showing what they owe us? They should be in the process of showing their evidence for what they believe that we owe them. And
that's essentially what the whole thing revolves around, a disagreement on how much of the missing assets are town assets.
That's part of it. I mean, they have a variety of things, but
like I said, the interest rate and
interest rates, overpayments, and things, and we're fine to sit down and have those discussions and see if we can come up with a number. I think that it's in the interest of the people of Warren County and Front Royal to resolve this. It doesn't look good for economic development. People coming in with companies are going to say, well, what's the local government like? And you do a Google search and you see EDA suing the town suing EDA, and so on. So
you're a mind reader, because I was just pointing to notes down here, and I was going to ask you that very question. How, as we segue into economic development, how does the fact that the town and the town-county EDA are litigating each other impact your ability to market the community?
Yeah,
Can't be helpful.
I don't think it's helpful at all. But I don't know how it isn't devastating, because we clearly are still able to do a lot of economic development and bring companies in. Frankly, from my perspective, it's the town, county, and EDA not being able to sit down and come up with a common plan for our area. We're one area. We're one economic division.
And I believe you all have pointed out over the last year that the trend statewide economically is for joint EDAs, not only like a municipality, a town, and a county in the same county, but regionally there's more cooperation between EDAs to present a united front to bring things to a region, not just a town or a county.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're starting to see that. We're seeing, not so much with EDA at the moment, but on broadband, for example, there's a regional effort to bring broadband to the entire Shenandoah Valley. And so it's a whole group of counties getting together and being able to go after grant money, having a big enough economic unit to interest, getting broadband providers to come into and provide it for economic development. To me, broadband is a critical element of what any community needs these days. It's the equivalent of whether the railroad came through your town or it bypassed your town. If your town got bypassed, they don't exist anymore.
And currently, some people would like the trains to bypass their community. They've been blocking access
Right.
for extended periods of time. But that's a whole nother issue for
Another whole
other
issue.
people. Talking about marketing, and we were talking about the COVID slowing all the legal processes down. How has the COVID, and I want to throw in also the spotted lanternfly aspect of having that here, has that made it more difficult for you? How do you deal with, the impacts of the COVID here and the spotted lanternfly designation?
Right.
How do you deal with that?
Well,
Or do you have to? I'm sure that somebody coming in may say, or even people that are already
Right.
here, this is going to cause a problem for us in the future. Should we stay here or not?
right. There's some of that. We're also a tourist community. Our fully vaccinated rate is just slightly over 37%. With the Delta variant now being predominant in the United States, you look at the states that are in the same range as we are, and their cases have spiked. Now, thankfully, ours have not. But is it just a question of time before we get there? So, taking COVID seriously, whether it's getting vaccinations, I'm a big believer in encouraging people to go talk to their doctor and make a decision. Don't rely on what you're reading on the internet and on Facebook, but go to somebody who knows what they're talking about, your family doctor, or wearing masks. I think more places are coming in with mask requirements, and it strikes me that business should have that right to be able to decide for themselves whether or not they want to protect their employees and their customers in how they do that.
Well, especially in Virginia as a right-to-work state, which essentially is interpreted by a lot of people as a right to fire for virtually no reason. That I think that type of legislation was passed to weaken unions
Right.
in the state,
Right.
and it was a very conservative push policy, and now you're arguing against the right of the private sector to do what it wants with its employees, which
Right.
has traditionally been a conservative strong point.
Yep. And if you want the more employee protections, perhaps Virginia isn't the best state to do business in. So.
Right.
But for businesses, Virginia was just again rated the friendliest state in the country for business. I'd like to see that continue here. So COVID has had some strange positive effects on economic development as well. Anyone in the
Here or in general?
Here and in specific places. If you're outside of a city and you're in an attractive area, which is exactly what we are, a lot of places are seeing an uptick in residential house sales. We've certainly seen it here. Front Royal is a hotbed for residential marketing, and we're seeing the same thing commercially. We're seeing a lot more businesses starting to look outside of the traditional places that they look. For places to either relocate, and we've had more than one business that was looking to move and deciding to stay here because this was a better place to do business if COVID and like pandemics are going to be a fact of our life. So,
one odd thing I noticed at the town council meeting on Monday, the 26th of July, where the issue of the anti-mandate legislation was before
Right.
council, and I estimated 150 people there, 51 of whom spoke, shoulder to shoulder throughout that meeting room at the Warren County Government Center, and a lot of the Valley Health employees were talking about the effectiveness of masking versus the vaccine in a positive way. But in that crowd, there were few, if any, masks that I saw being worn. That if I wasn't vaccinated, that would have worried me, because you have a lot of unvaccinated people,
Right.
shoulder to shoulder, talking about how effective masks are, but they don't have masks on.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's a real
Not
concern.
that that's an EDA problem, but
Well, I mean, and
well,
this
eventually it could be.
it could be.
If
Well,
we have a surge.
you know, again, if we only have 37% fully vaccinated in the county,
Which is low for the state.
which is low
Right.
for the state, it puts us in. If we were a state, we'd be in the among the worst 5 in the entire country. The closest to us, similar, is Louisiana, and they just had a spike due to the Delta variant of COVID, which was as much as they've had ever. So this goes back to the big surges before, and it wasn't like before it would kind of build up to it and then it went down. This just went just like that, and it just shows you how virulent this particular variation is.
And I guess it depends on how much credence you put into government or medical reporting, but I think a lot of the surging has been identified publicly as being related to non-vaccinated parts of the communities.
Yeah, I mean, it's an unfortunate phrase, but they are saying it's a pandemic of the unvaccinated. I do believe people should have the right to talk and should confer with their physician. There's some people who can't get it. There's some people it wouldn't be a good idea to get. But that's who they ought to be talking to on that. I just think it's hard in a community if you're trying to limit what employers can do, and you're trying to attract people here. I mean, we have the natural assets. We have some terrific amenities there, but it's hard to get people to come when you say, "Hey, let's go to a COVID hotbed." It's just not going to work well.
And
So
we're going to try to legislate that you don't have control of your workforce.
right,
In
yeah,
a right to work state,
yeah. So I
right
think
to fire state.
my sense is that probably that legislation. I don't want to call it a legal pronouncement, but I would think that it's possibly not enforceable.
Well, I think that was part of the reason for the majority opposition is the town legal department had essentially told council that it was
Right.
not legally supportable if they did it.
Right.
And some of the three that voted against it in their statements about why they were voting that way pointed that out. One of them, I want to say it was Latasha Thompson, said if we pass this doesn't protect you from being fired.
Right.
It's going to make you feel good here in this room, but it doesn't offer you any protections you think you're going to get.
Yep.
So let's end on a positive note. As you've said, we still have our natural assets. We've had a relatively low outbreak so far, knock on wood.
Knock on wood.
So we do have that. And a recent EDA success was the attraction of the drone manufacturer and operator Silent Falcon here. They are locating out and getting situated out at the Front Royal Airport.
Yep.
And I believe they have an open house coming up, which I'm looking forward to.
Yeah.
I want to see some of those drones in operation.
Well, I've seen video of them, and they're incredibly impressive in what they can do. They haven't set a final date for when they're going to have it, but
I guess it revolves around when their facility's ready.
is ready to go, and they're moved in and they feel comfortable with it. And then I think you're going to see a pretty nifty drone display when they do their. I'm guessing
Right.
that they would do that, but
Because I believe I've been told by you or somebody over at the EDA that at least one of the drone pilots, and they do help out localities with
yes,
missing person searches and things like that, that some of their operators have military experience, like flight military experience.
Yep.
Pilots, actually.
yeah, it's kind of neat. It's a great success story because one of the reasons they came here, and I might have mentioned this before, but it's worth the mentioning again, was because RMA has a drone club, and we got the the teacher who was the sponsor of the club, together with the CEO of Silent Falcon, and they hit it off.
Hit it off, right? Yeah.
And from Silent Falcon's standpoint, here's a group of young people that they can work with, potentially bring them in to work. Being a remote drone operator is a really nice job, and you'd be able to work right at the airport. So it's again a real win-win.
Anything else you'd like to cover? Since I said it's been a little longer than a month since we did our last update, but I think we've segued from the problem area of litigation into the positives that we still have going for us here in economic development.
Yeah.
And this might be a good place to wrap up.
Well, I'd just say a couple of things. One, I would be remiss if I didn't do a shout out to both the staff we have and a terrific board. I handle a lot of the legal issues so that everyone else can be focusing on economic development. And we've pivoted from we've pivoted to doing active marketing, and are getting ready to embark on a whole process to both identify the industries and specific firms we want to bring to Front Royal and to Warren County, and then to go out after them to bring them here. So that's one thing that is a big change. We haven't EDA hasn't done that for a long time, and this is a way that we can better match the companies we're trying to attract here and to keep here to match them with the county, so that becomes a big piece to it. I think those are the big issues. I think we're hopeful that while the residential surge has been real and is current, that the commercial surge in companies interested in moving to an area like this. We are so well situated in the Mid-Atlantic for anyone who wants to have to be able to move their product anywhere on the whole East Coast. We are a day from half the country, one day from half the country of the United States. So from that standpoint, being right on 66, 81, we really have a tremendous opportunity to
Yes,
do
we are
that.
a transportation hub.
We are, and we're trying to take full advantage of that. So
And
it's good.
Just to address what you were saying about the current board and staff, I have noticed that compared to the boards, and they've changed a little bit. I mean, several board members, former board members on the old EDA board died in office, and we're dealing with pretty severe health problems. But the new board, it's not like a retirement job. These are active people in various professions that relate to economic development who are very proactive
Yep.
in their input and contributions, and I think that's been a really positive change.
Yeah, we have people coming in who have specific skills that we can really take advantage of. We have people with good marketing skills. We have another legally trained attorney on the board. We've got.
You can drop names if you want, or we can keep.
But we have people who have entrepreneurial skills, and then just as a board, I mean, you start anything, and you have your sea legs, and it's hard to get going. But we know where we want to go now, and we know the things that we have to do to bring economic development here. So now it's just executing, and I'm very hopeful that you're going to start to see some very positive results.
And I guess we know where we want to go now, and that's to wrap this up. Mark on the camera, thanks for your help. And I guess that will be a wrap with Jeff Brown of the EDA. And we'll try to be more punctual with the monthly updates.
Sounds good to me.